record now.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we are just a minute after the top of the hour, so let's get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are at our inaugural roundtable, and we're going to be discussing CS owning revenue. I'm Elizabeth Italiano, and I'm a managing partner with Go-to-Market Advisors, and we specialize in diagnosing and resolving go-to-market challenges. I'm joined by my colleague, Indu. And Indu, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Indu, and I'm a managing director here at GTM Advisors. So coming from a background in both sales and customer success, really excited to host this panel session today. I'll turn it over to panel, starting with Chad, to go over their introductions as well.
Sure. Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. My name is Chad Horenfeldt. I'm a very experienced customer success leader. I've been in customer success for, I'd say, over 18 years, so a long time, very early in SaaS, and specifically as a customer success leader for about 10 plus years. My most recent role was leading the customer success team at Customer with a K, and that's a CRM support platform, and it was a part of Meta. And in terms of this discussion, I'm so excited about it. I've seen revenue being owned by sales, by customer success. I think it's a really good debate, and I think it's a really good topic for right now.
All right, great. We'll turn it over to Kevin.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin. So my background's been very varied. I've been in professional services, sales, account management, support, been an SC, and also a CS leader. I've been fortunate enough to build an EMEA organization from scratch. Worked with big enterprise companies as well as startups. I IPO'd with NetSuite and most recently with Zuora. And I'd just be, interested to just talk to some of the aspects I've seen of how sales and CS come together, with sales being able to drive, upsell, but CS being able to drive a value realization methodology. So tying the two together. And I also host a podcast called CSM Talk, which you should check out. That's me.
All right, Olivia, over to you.
Hi, I'm Olivia. So I have been working in sales for over 10 years and most recently worked for a company called Phrasee. I've worked there for 5.5 years. And in that time, I started off as an AE, so in new sales, new business. And then a new role was created called the Commercial Account Director, whereby I owned the commercial aspect of the CS team. That was very successful for us. So we ended up growing out a CAD team, which we then changed to call Strads. And I led that team for a little while before Phrasee then regionalized. So we separated to the North Americas and EMEA, where North America had that same structure of new business, but then CS plus Strad. And then in the UK, we've decided to do the AEs owning new business, renewals, and existing business as well, and then the CS team sitting separately. So quite interesting, diverse techniques, which I think will play nicely into our debate.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and really appreciate it. And so as you can see, we have some varied backgrounds for both sales and customer success. So it's going to lend really nicely to this conversation. So today, we're not just going to be talking about CS owning revenue, but more specifically, we're going to get into why nobody is right in the should CS own a revenue number debate, and why it's actually the wrong question. But most importantly, we're going to get into how to drive revenue from the customer base effectively. So in part due to the market changes, there's been this growing conversation taking place, not just in customer success, but in the broader go-to-market community around CS owning a revenue number. And so this question has sparked a lot of debate, with a lot of people strongly in favor for, strongly opposed, and some that are saying it depends. So our view at Go-to-Market Advisors is really that this is an unproductive debate, and it doesn't accomplish anything for the end customer. It doesn't drive results. So the more productive question to ask is, how do you manage post-sale revenue? So I want to turn it over to the panel at this point. And Chad, I'm going to come to you first, but we'll get everyone on the panel to answer this question as well. And so the first question is and this is a two-parter, by the way, What factors do we need to consider when we're deciding who should have ownership of expansion revenue? And also, what are your thoughts on there being no one single answer for whether CS should own a revenue number or not? What's your point of view on this?
Sure. I think in terms of the factors, there's a lot of different factors. So I'd say some of the factors might involve the complexity of this expansion motion. So, if you have a complex product and to complete an upsell, maybe you have additional products that are complex products that might require that there are demos, that might require getting other stakeholders involved that you typically wouldn't speak with. So you have to consider that as a factor. I'd say another factor would be around just time. You only have so much time in your day to do certain things. So if you're in sales, if your focus is on new business, how are you going to concentrate on upsells, cross-sells, et cetera? If you're in customer success and you're a customer success manager, you might be focused on the ongoing aspects that you need to do in your job, being proactive, doing business reviews, perhaps focusing on renewal. So that's another consideration. And I'd say the last one, I'd say very tied to the time aspect, is skills. Do you have the right skills to actually be able to do type of a upsell or a cross-sell type of motion? Are you able to handle objections? Are you able to do the right type of discovery? Going back to being able to demo. So those are some of the things that I would consider. And then in terms of the second question, where this should be owned, I think that my perspective is that CS should look to own the majority of this, perhaps retention as a table stake, but it also depends on where the stage of the company is. And, kind of going back to some of those other factors I've mentioned, it's not a hard and fast rule for me. I think at the end of the day, it's making sure that it happens, making sure that the customer experience is a good one. And then ultimately the business is, doing what it needs to do to grow and, build on the successes that it's had.
Yeah, those are some great points. The skill is, certainly one that we're hearing a lot of. And so traditionally, unfortunately, we've seen customer success teams not get as much investment in training as our sales counterparts. But when I've seen customer success teams get that investment, they can upskill, and they can, when it's right to do so, of course, to your point, the time and, the complexity of the product, they can execute on all of those elements really well. So thank you for that. So it sounds like you're on the it depends side of the vote. So Olivia, we'll turn it over to you next.
So I would say there are two factors. So skill set and relationships. Skill sets in that, yes, the selling ability are, everything that you just mentioned there, like objection handling, building pipeline, etc. Is that necessarily something that sits with people who are amazing at problem solving and nurturing relationships? It does not mean that they are opposed in any shape or form. The fact that at Phrasee now our sales team does everything suggests that they're not opposed and that you can do everything. But the other thing is relationships. And the real blocker that I found in my career is that the CS team that build the relationships with the day-to-day users and the problem solvers, they've got such a strong base there that they don't necessarily want to then build the relationships with the decision makers and the budget holders, because often there's a slight conflict of interest in that the people they deal with day to day report into that person. So they don't want to be seen to be going over their heads. They don't want to be seen to sort of not being in an alliance with the day-to-day team. So having a secondary person, whether that's new business or a commercial CS person, come in and sort of take that away and almost play off each other in a good cop, bad cop situation, I have seen work very successfully in the past. So relationships, skill set, I think. And then to your point, where should it be owned? I think the most successful situation I've seen is having a commercial person sit specifically in the CS team. One of the challenges I'm finding having my team do new business, existing and upsells is exactly the time question there. It's like you've got to be prospecting all the time to keep your pipeline full. And if you take your ball off it and you start doing upsell and you start doing renewals, you've got to juggle those two aspects, which is challenging. However, a counter to that is, do you just need a bigger BDR function? but that's almost a separate debate in itself.
Right. Yeah. And I really like how you took the customer viewpoint on that as well. So what you were talking about around, do you go over their head? Does it become seen as going over their head when you've been working with, so the power user, or, whatever the case may be. So I love that angle as well. So sounds like you're kind of on it depends a little bit as well. Yeah.
I would just counter that, to that point where the CSMs might not necessarily be engaging with the senior stakeholders. I think that that's a training / goals problem that can easily be solved. I think that CSMs feel comfortable working with their day-to-day contacts, but they really should be expanding beyond that and partnering with their day-to-day contacts to build the relationships with the senior stakeholders. And if they don't, they're going to be in serious trouble, because if they haven't established what the outcomes are the customers are trying to achieve, and that's typically comes down from the decision makers and senior stakeholders. So I think, but it kind of goes back to that time thing, right? If you're able to partner with sales and you're able to do that, great. But as we all know, we work with companies that have different segments, and it's not all possible. And we're running a lot of lean teams these days. So, but I would definitely challenge that. I think that there's definitely a shift in customer success where customer success managers, they need to be focusing on having more of those strategic conversations, and they need to be leveraging other roles within their teams to perhaps be having, let's say some of the more lower level conversations. Maybe the support team's not where it needs to be. But anyway, that's something we can come back to.
And hence the great debate, because there are a lot of different facets to consider. So Kevin, I would love to hear your thoughts on the question and what you just heard.
Oh, I'm going to be somewhere down the middle on this, right? In that, so I mean, as I see it, there's a couple of things. Firstly, alignment. So are we all looking in the same direction? Is there a compensation aspect which says CS has got something to want to drive upsell? And so is sales. So we've got that there. Are we in the same place? Are we all in the same place? And this comes back to territory planning. Olivia's got a number for EMEA. 70% of that probably comes from upsell, 30% from new business, maybe. I'm going to sit down with her and say, well, we've got 100 accounts here. What are your top 10 that are going to get you your upsell for the year? And I've got to have coverage on that. So we're going to be aligned on that. And then we're going to do some joint account planning on each of those. No account plan, no CSM. That's what we're doing, right? So you've got to give me an account plan where we work together. It's a joint one, which has what's our power looking like? What's the business initiatives? But then we add in the CSM bits, like what's the health looking like across different categories? Is there value realization in place, right? How's the success plan moving along? So when we put all those together, we get a much more holistic view of those 10 accounts, which are the ones they're going to be seeing my team's driving value from, which is a good place for you to start honing in on where your number might come from. So it gives you that extra level. And it looks at it through the lens of customer value, of where you're going to get your upsell. So there's that. And then I just think, the who does what will come out of the account planning on, what are the things that we're missing here. So again, of those top 10 or top 15, my team doesn't have access to power in these places. That will be reflected in the fact that the success plans look like duds, right? We will hit a ceiling in terms of talking to operational people, but nothing above that. So if we don't have that, we can't move to a place of trying to generate a decent upsell attached to a success plan, no access to power. So all these things are all interlinked, and we can, if we put that structure together, we can all work really well on it. The second question, right, as to who should own that. I'm a firm believer that the transaction should be owned by somebody that is sales. So it could be a salesperson that sits in my team. And I've seen this happen before. We have a renewals person, and they're pretty much like a renewals rep, but they sit under customer success. But it has to be somebody who's transactional and is focused on that. You don't want to start having CSMs doing paperwork, right, as another thing added on, back to the time thing. And forecasting, that's an art in itself, and we want to leave that to the professionals. So, but again, that'll come back to the account plan. You'll see other aspects there of health and driving value. which we'll take care of, and then the commercial side, the sales team can take care of. And both of those together also form really solid deal plans as well, right? So that's what I reckon.
That's
Okay.
great, Kevin. And I think what you touched on there, that it's really a joint plan together, everyone, working collaboratively, is a big point because it is all about balance. On that note, when you think about balance, I think the question we hear quite often is, as someone in CS or someone who's a CAD, for example, how do I make sure that I'm hitting both those driving customer value, but also hitting those revenue objectives? So Chad, what would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times in customer success, we kind of worry about selling in general. And I think that really has to go out the door. I think that customer success people need to realize that you're selling every day. And if that's a challenge, then they need to be trained in terms of how to ask what Bob London, you might be aware of how he asked what I call disruptive questions. So a disruptive question would be something like, let's say that a competitor was to call you up, today. What are the chances from 0 to 10 that you take that call, with 10 being, very likely that you take that call? And so those are some things that, CS people really need to be trained on, because, there's a lot of fear. So as an example, another one would be customers really angry, and it's like, oh my gosh, the customer's angry. We really shouldn't be even thinking about upselling. But what you should be thinking about is something that I mentioned earlier, is at the end of the day, like what is the outcome? Like, what is it they're trying to achieve? And a lot of times customers are angry, not that they want to leave, it's that they want to leverage your solution, but they just necessarily can't get from A to B, and they need help to get there. So if you help them, then that might be actually an upsell. I think what I would caution, teams that are going out there is that don't lead necessarily with the upsell, lead with, okay, what is it you're trying to achieve, and kind of start at the top and trying to understand their business, and also provide them with options. So an option could be like, here's the, low thing that you need, the low option, like, read this knowledge base article and you're able to configure it yourself. Or, here's this other feature that will make it so much easier and faster, and you'll be able to achieve your outcomes even faster and better. So anyway, so those are just some suggestions that I would have as you're starting to think about these types of conversations with your team.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think what we see there is facilitating that partnership, or in this case, resolution, makes it feel like a stronger bond, and you're proving that value. Even when the situation might seem like it's a bit hairy, it's how you respond to that situation that really builds value, which can kind of complement the upsell at the end of the day. Liv, what are your thoughts on that question?
Sorry, my internet cut out. Did you say me, Indu?
Yes, I did.
Yes, okay. That would explain the silence. Sorry, do let me know if I go a little bit unstable. For me, customer value and revenue should be completely aligned, and you lead with the customer value and the revenue will follow. So if you truly understand what your customers are trying to achieve, why they're trying to achieve it, and what's driving that momentum, then those upsells will be baked into that progression. And I think it's positioning yourself not as a support team, but as a consultant. Like, you are there to drive them forwards. You're a tech company or whatever product provider, but the customer success function is almost an extension of their growth and their progression. So what we've done very successfully in the past has been to sit down, contracts done, signed, and also another reason why having a commercial function within the CS team is very useful, because so often the AEs and new business can just throw these deals over the fence, and you're left in CS with a situation. Whereas if there's ownership from new business to existing, hopefully you don't get that disconnect and that dissatisfaction that can sometimes arise, and you haven't even started a relationship yet. So being able to sit down as soon as a contract's signed and saying, okay, what are we achieving in 3 months, 6 months and beyond? And knowing what that growth looks like, and then having those revenue conversations baked in. So in my opinion and my experience, the most effective way is when customer value is revenue, and they are exactly the same. And you don't push the accounts that don't have revenue in them, because then you're leading on by your own agenda. Like, you said, Kevin, analyze your accounts, know where your growth is coming from. Don't try and push your agenda and your growth if it's not naturally going to come from that account. Identify the ones that will, and then just forecast accurately.
Yeah, I love that approach. So you're doing an honest assessment of this is where we can add value and therefore we'll get resulting growth. I think that approach goes hand in hand with the fact that these aren't competitive agendas. These are very much complementary at the end of the day. Kevin, anything else to add there from your end?
Yeah, so the thing, this is really in line with what Liv is saying, and that having customer value aligned with revenue is, I've looked at in the past mapping a value realization framework to where upsells spin off. So if I give you a really quick example of what a very simple stage is, you map them like sales stages. So for instance, I do a billing system that builds invoices and stuff. My stage R0 is foundational. So it's transactions. Are they onboarded? Are they logging in? So that's like foundational value. The next level up is R1, which is the users. Are they saying things like, this makes my life easier because it takes 2 hours off running a bill run, and these kind of things? They're anecdotal, not quantified. You get to the next stage up, which is R2, and that might be the financial controller saying, you've reduced my debtor sales outstanding, right, by 5 days. Then the stage you really want to get to, which is the CFO level, saying, well, that's the amount of cash it's enabled me to bring into the business. I'm investing these into other things, or reducing my DSO has got me closer to get my next round of funding. That's the real goal. The cash you're bringing in is actually paying for itself. So that's R3. Now, if I have this all mapped out within all of my accounts, we can then start saying, if you're at R2, there are add-ons which could accelerate getting to R3. Then I can sit with Liv and we can go through my accounts and go, show me all the stuff at R2. Why are all these ones at R1? Well, we haven't got access to Pound. We can't get that. So it becomes a more structured way in which people can visualize value realization when the right time to actually come in and start proposing, which the CSM can very happily do. They'll go, well, I'm not selling you anything, but this will get you quicker. It's an additional cost. But if you're interested, then we can bring in somebody to talk to you about it. So it's a very natural progression of doing that. And you don't compromise on, really what my team is, which is the AEs of value realization and not the commercial AEs. So we've got a program we can drive, and it dovetails right nicely into where upsells naturally happen with a more predictable business and drive customer value.
That's great. That's a huge shift in the market. I'm excited to see, as we've always seen sort of the measurement, the stage progression on the pre-sales side, but absolutely in line with what you're saying, Kevin. If we start measuring and building out this progression, it not only helps the team that's actually trying to generate the upsell, but the customer as well, when they understand, what's my growth path with this company look like.
And want to call out a comment in the chat here based on this discussion. So Rohan says cross or upsell should be the result of making the customer succeed on the value they are trying to find in the product or solution provided. So I think that's a great summary for a lot of what we just discussed, and completely agree. So thank you for that, Rohan. So I think the next question that we have really builds upon this discussion as well. And so it's around best practices. So, and Chad, we'll go back to you. So what are the best practices for aligning sales and customer success to meet revenue expectations? And I'll add, to go back to part of our earlier conversation, a little caveat onto that, and that's around stakeholder mapping and management. And so how do you recommend CS and AEs and AMs work together on that stakeholder mapping and aligning on stakeholders across the customer base? So over to you, Chad.
Yeah, I think there's some basic things that you should be doing. So there should be processes that are working across sales and customer success. So everyone knows what their role should be across the customer journey. So if you've heard of models like a racing model, who's responsible, who should be accompanying, et cetera, just know what those particular roles should be. The other thing, and then obviously communicating those out, so everyone is in the loop. There's no communication snafus, or at least not too many. I think one of the other big ones, and this is really important, I'd say, is around culture. So a lot of organizations is kind of this traditional approach, and why a lot of customer success organizations don't want to report into a CRO is that they always play the second fiddle to sales. And I'd say that organizations that are changing and actually doing this right are the organizations that have eliminated terms like sales kickoff. It's company kickoff, or they've removed Sales Club. It's not Sales Club, it's the President's Club, or whatever you want to call it. I think that is really, really important. If I think back to my early days in customer success, one of the best experiences that I had was a sales rep. And at Eloqua, when I was there in the early days, and now it's been purchased by Oracle, but in the early days, the sales reps, you all lived by a certain culture of the entire company. And that just permeated through everyone. Essentially, it was the kind of no idiot rule. It doesn't matter how well you did, how much you sold. If you were an idiot, you're out. And this particular rep, one of the things that he did was we worked in the same territory. And so he realized that if I, service and help these customers achieve value, that it's going to help him in his territory as he grows his customers and we build advocates. And one of the things that he did is that he got these like bonus, points that he could use towards gifts. And this is going back a long time. And he gave me all of his points, and I bought like video camera, which I used on my honeymoon, all these things. And that's how we developed a really strong relationship. So I think that culture part is really, really important. And I'd say the last thing, and this is for everyone here, is, really understanding the compensation, and specifically in customer success, how the sales reps are compensated. Going back to one thing you mentioned, Liz, is, why does a sales rep care like when that new deal is signed and maybe there's problems? In some of the best situations I've found is that the sales rep actually gets comped on some of that expansion revenue in that first year. And, in CS, you might say, oh, that's crap. Like, why are they getting comped? But if they have some skin in the game, then they're going to be interested in terms of what's happening. And I'd say on the flip side is if sales reps are involved in renewals, you want to understand how are they being comped for renewals versus other types of, expansion, upsell, et cetera, because that might, be what motivates them in terms of how they're actually partnering with you. And there can be challenges there that you need to understand and resolve.
Those are really fantastic points. And the culture thing is so key. And I think my call to action for leaders out there would be to embody that culture and lead by example at the executive level if you expect to see that being driven also at the frontline level as well. I mean, compensation is so important, and there's no blanket answer for compensation. It really depends on the company, the market, what the Phrasee model looks like. So I think that's a really important call out, as well as think about what behaviors you want to drive and what results you want to drive, and then align your compensation accordingly. So that's great, Chad. Thank you. So Liv, over to you.
I'll have to counter a little bit, Chad, to what you said, because AEs getting comped on existing like renewals or existing, in my experience, has just resulted in AEs getting involved in conversations where they do not need to be involved because the CS are handling it. And it kind of in an opposite way. But then I guess this is going to depend on the individual, isn't it? Like, are they collaborative? Are they helpful and supportive? And therefore it's a positive thing? Or are they just concerned about their compensation and getting involved in conversations that they don't or shouldn't be involved in? So I guess comes back to culture. But for me, the really big thing is goal alignment. So if you've got two separate goals for CS and new business, then there's just never going to be that synergy. So for example, I've worked where CS have been focused on retention, and that is their sole focus, whereas upsell and new logos has been for new business. So we'd have that sort of whilst it's like not commercially driven renewals per se, they are focused on the relationship and making sure that the engagement's high, etc. But then if there's any churn, the commercial sort of penalty falls on the new business rep, so that they get penalized and their comp is reduced because there's been churn on CS. But the CS isn't necessarily bought into that because there's no compensation impact for them. So it's just that misalignment. And I think who should own a revenue target? The question for me is not necessarily who should own it, because I think it should sit across both functions. It should be a common goal, and therefore everybody's perfectly aligned. But who actually does the work within it, that's the separate question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I love Phrasee models so much. And so for anyone who's not familiar or used Phrasee models before, it's basically a matrix where you assign the activities and jobs to be done of who's accountable, who's responsible, who's consulted, and who's informed. And mapping that across the organization, one, it lends a certain objectivity to the question of who owns it, because you're just looking at the jobs to be done and then taking a customer lens as well to that. And then that helps to inform some of the compensation questions as well. So thank you for that, Liv. Kevin, what are your thoughts?
So back to alignment. So compensation alignment is important. I think both people need to understand that if we're both working on this together, because all the things I've talked about of a joint account plan, of like joint white space planning, of getting the AE to help us maybe get access to power so we can drive valuation frameworks and valuation programs. If they're only going to work if the AE is seeing something in it for them, right? And that's worth their time doing. So comp plan really, really important. I think the other thing is that I think, again, that structured format of an AE being able to see where upsells potentially could come from could make things way more efficient, so that if you had someone who was doing their lean business and they came back in a really structured way going, I'm going to sit with my CSMs, go across the account, see where all my R1s are and how I nudge them to R2s, see where all the R2s are, and see that's potentially where we can start putting some upsell plans around. So creating that structure makes it more efficient, so that an AE sometimes doesn't feel, I've just got to be on every call because I don't really know what's going on. And then that drags you away from doing other things. So I think taking that kind of friction out could really help. The other thing is also, and I don't think we've talked about this, is the impact a value realization program could have on actually winning new business. So if you're running these programs where you can say, look, I've got the CFO out of Coca-Cola who can talk to how we took, 30 million out of the business in costs. Imagine what that would do for a new business AE trying to win new business, of saying, not only can we do this and here's the hard numbers, but this is the program that does it. And I'm going to bring in a CSM to talk to you about how that was done. That's a differentiator, and it helps you hold your value in your kind of price. So, that's what I think. Value, value, and value.
Yeah. And I think, Kevin, what that makes me think of, the way you describe it, is, creating a win-win-win. So there's a mutual benefit to the AE and or AM and the CSM working together. And then, of course, to the client, because they're able to get the value and achieve the goals that they're looking to achieve by leveraging whatever product and solution is put in place. So we have another round of questions for the panel, and then we'll go to the live Q&A. I think we'll have time to take a few questions from the audience. But Indu, I think you had a question that you wanted to ask Liv, and then Chad and Kevin, I have a question for you. So over to you, Indu.
Yes. So Liv, having been on both sides of the fence, carrying a bag in the past, what advice would you have for CS leaders who are now having to carry a quota?
So for me, it goes back to a little bit what Kevin was saying about account mapping. So the tool that I used when trying to get that commercial view of our existing business was to run a willing versus able test. So basically it's, this is probably very well known, but I stole it from my friend who's a teacher, who they have to run this exercise effectively of saying, of all the students who are willing to learn and who are able to learn, and they sort of categorize them. So ran the same exercise with their customers of who's willing to grow with us. So who do we really understand? What is their strategy for growth, their aspirations, what's driving it? We've got such a good network and sort of stakeholders, etc., within the team, but they're also able to, because they've got budget, because they have buy-in from senior stakeholders, etc. And those in that category, that's where you start focusing your time. And then once you've got that understanding of your willing versus able accounts, you can then ask the question of, okay, how much revenue and when? And again, that goes back to tying into the customer value and that progression map. And then you can work out the revenue number that will be attached to it. And then your secondary actions will be for those that are willing but not able. Well, they want to grow with us, they see the benefits, but they haven't got the senior buy-in, they haven't got the budget. So then you can work with them to partner to then tackle those, build those bridges, tackle those problems. if they are able, so you've got great relationships throughout the company, there's budget, but they don't see the value, well, then you can start to do things like customer events, lean on marketing, more use cases, more whatever it is that you need to do, maybe a proof of concept into another channel, anything that you need to do to get them willing to then grow with you. And then anyone who's not willing and not able, just don't waste your time and know where to invest your resources.
I love that. I think it takes that concept of the health score that a lot of us are familiar with, the red, yellow, green, and adds another dimension of, okay, let's talk about the customer's intention or how they perceive our solution and growth in the future. So that's great. Chad, Kevin, anything to add on there before I hand it back to Liz?
No, I like that. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So Chad, we'll go to you first. And so our question for you is, what advice on ensuring that clients continue to receive value would you give to sales leadership taking on customer success and expansion revenue responsibilities for the first time?
Yeah, I would say that sales leaders really should not treat the CS team as a secondary team, like support. They're not support, they should be treated as equals. And again, I think it was just something I had mentioned earlier, that there really needs to be that partnership. And there's that feeling where, even something you were mentioning, Kevin, around value and value realization, I'd say like a counterpoint to that is that it really should be a joint process where CS and sales, depending on how processes are laid out, they should be working on whatever that value realization model is, and that CS is delivering that value too. So it's really changing that mindset that we're all, like I think you were mentioning, both you were mentioning this, we're all working towards those same goals, and just making sure that that cultural permeates down throughout the organization, down to even little things like the celebrations. There's always massive celebrations when a new deal comes in, and there really should be the same type of celebrating when a client renews for 3 years. There's a significant upsell, and it should be looked upon as a revenue organization rather than just the sales and CS different designations.
That's great. Kevin, what are your thoughts?
So I would my advice to a CRO would be to look at value realization like you would do a sales process. Have that structure to it. Have your upsells spin off and mapped against those stages, so that you've got a really clear and consistent way of being able to view where the customer's getting value out of us and where's the opportunity for expansion and how they're crossing over. Then when you've got that done, really, you've got to be help us drive our organization to get as many R3s as possible. That's got to be our goal. Every time Olivia's team gets an order signed, they ring the bell, right? Every time we get an R3, we bang the gong. That should be the deal, right? Once we're all driving a similar kind of cadence, a similar kind of organizational way that way, right? I think we do that, then it makes it so much easier, because a salesperson can come in and really quickly pick up what I've said in terms of structuring out value realization. They get it. Oh, it's that stage, okay. Then you get the wider conversations of, right, well, why are all these at R1? All these are R0. Does that correspond with what we're seeing in the customer health? Yeah, politically, we're very weak in there. All these kind of things you would do in analyzing accounts, you can bring to value realization, and it becomes just an easier thing to take on and get muscle memory out. And when you get value realization really well, that's when we start looking at the thing of how CS can start winning new business. And that's always been my goal. When we get to that point, that we can start actually helping you, acquire new customers and hold your value on them just because of the process we got in place for realizing ROI. That's when this all becomes a completely different conversation. Culture will change. And then, we're in a very interesting and exciting place then.
Yeah. So, tracking, measuring, mapping, giving visibility and structure to the systems and process and the revenue potential and pipeline is really important. And I think that's one of the things, that I've seen in CS anyway, is that there isn't always that reporting and data structure and a strong adherence to that mapping. And that can be a massive game changer for both, customer success managers and making decisions in their day-to-day, but also for executives and the strategic decisions that they want to make and need to make in the organization. So Liv, do you have anything that you would add to that before we go to the audience for Q&A?
No, just maybe a question to Chad and Kevin. So would you suggest that you'd go so far as to have the same compensation for CS and have them join like President's Club as well? Or would you keep it delineated at that point?
I think that different roles are compensated differently. So I wouldn't necessarily align the compensation, but I would create criteria that would allow people within CS a greater opportunity to go to President's Club, where a lot of times it's just like a token representation. It's like, oh, this person worked really hard, they're going to send them to club. It's like, no, this person influenced X amount of revenue. This person opened up X amount of revenue, whatever that is, but make it really clear. And so the person feels that they deserve to go. And also there's a greater representation that goes to these types of things.
Mm-hmm. Great. Kevin, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I would say that, I've worked in places before where CS gets, we've got a number. We actually do have internal quotas and numbers. So you've got a book of business, which is 5 million. Your number for renewals is 95%, right? Even though it's the AE negotiating that, you're part of a team that's going to make sure it's 95%. And then what will happen after that is for upsell, you may have like 20%. So on your book of business of 5 million, you've got to be part of upsell, which goes to adding $1 million onto that. So, and they all make up the compensation, the variable part of the CSM. And if they hit those numbers, they go to club.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other thing is, like, I'm not in favor of a commission model for CSMs. Perhaps for the renewal managers, that would make sense. But the problem is that I don't want to have short-term thinking. I think we've alluded to this a little bit. But if you're just focused on your quarterly numbers, as we know as we want to keep our customers longer term, that there's a lot involved for those customers that are renewing, down the road. Many times the customer, it will take them 6 months to rip out your platform and move to a different platform. And you really need to be thinking further along the line. So that's, why, like, from a compensation perspective, I wouldn't necessarily look to have the same compensation for particular roles.
Yeah.
But then the other question is that how much is variable and how much is base? So you can look at that as for a sales rep, it's probably 50-50, right? Well, it's not going to be that for a CSM. But of that variable, you split that between, part of it is upsell, part of it is renewal, part of it might be an MBO of some sort.
Yeah, and typically I see, and again, this isn't a blanket answer for everyone, but where there is some compensation component for CSMs, it's more of like an 80-20 split thereabouts. So it's not such a commission-driven OTE such as sales. The other thing that I've seen work well across some organizations, again, not a blanket for every organization out there, but is where that 20% might be, part of it might be revenue driven, and then the other part might be a customer health score or something that's really qualitative and goes back to that value that we're driving to customers. So I think we've established that it depends. There's so many variables to think about, but I think everybody here has given some really solid tips on the things to think about, how to think about it and how to approach it. So I think we have time for 2 questions, maybe 3 questions from the audience. And we have one already, so we'll go to Tanya's question. So Tanya's question is, do you think that the question of who owns the revenue should also be impacted by the type of product or service being offered? So for example, if the product is quite straightforward, the CSM can spend more time on commercial activities, versus with a complex product, the CSM will spend more time ensuring the desired outcomes are reached. So continuing with the theme, Chad, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that I mentioned. It's a really great question, Tanya. It's something I mentioned early on, where the complexity of your product and your upsells, those additional products or whatever that expansion is, that will determine roles and what people can do, et cetera. And so I think it's a really valid point. I think the other thing too is in terms of the CSMs and what they can take on, and it's straightforward. I definitely think that the segment, haven't talked a lot about this, but the different segments in your business can also determine who takes on what. So, as an example, when you're enterprise customers, those upsells, there's typically more people involved. It's typically a lot more complexity in terms of trying to sell that or whatever it is you're trying to do. And there's more risk involved if you're trying to add on additional products. So that's just something else to keep in mind versus, let's say, if you have really small clients, the upsells are just like literally a no-brainer. It's a lot less money. It's easier to maybe experiment with, try it out, less approvals and things like that. So lots of different things to take into consideration. So it's a really good question.
Yeah, segmentation is a really good point. So Liv, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, so the question's suggesting that time is the hindrance for CS getting more involved in the commercial areas. So if it's more complex, they won't have as much time then they'll spend on the customers, whereas if it was simple, they'd have more time to spend on commercial activities. Whereas going back to some of our earlier points, I think the question isn't necessarily time and resources, it's skill set. So I think, are you hiring a CS team that are able to have those senior relationships, that are able to negotiate longer, more complex deals and are commercially driven? In that sense, then yes, that ownership should sit across both teams. But I don't think it's a question of time. I think it goes back to a question of skill set.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd have to chime in there as well, Liv. So I think that time is an important component. But yeah, if you're dealing with a very complex tech solution, in my experience, CSMs tend to know a bit more than someone on a sales team. So I think gauging really the complexity that's involved and what is involved in that upsell. Is it actually talking about a part of the product and hinging it to a solution? Or is it something that can be a little bit more simpler, a little bit more sales oriented? Really important to gauge that.
But one thing to point out, like a customer is a very complex product, and I intentionally set up a technical account management team to work with our CSMs so that our CSMs could actually handle renewals along with their other proactive responsibilities, and they can partner with the technical account managers to tackle some of those exploratory conversations. And we still had sales coming in for upsells. So again, going back to Liz, your comment around it depends. I think that again, like we've seen so many different permutations, like based on where the company is in their life cycle, when they went to market, how big they are, and these responsibilities shift all over the place. And as CS leaders, we really have to take an open mind and look at what are the company goals, what is it you're trying to accomplish as a company, where are the challenges, and then work with your cross-functional leaders in determining where is the proper area that these different responsibilities fall.
Yeah. Going back to the Phrasee, looking at the jobs to be done, and then who's best, situated to deliver on that for the customer. So Kevin, we'll go over to you, and then we may have time for one question, or we'll wrap up.
Sure. So yeah, I totally concur with most with what's been said here. I would say that the commercial responsibility doesn't sit with the CSM. Now, I'm open to having somebody within my organization that deals with that. So for instance, it's the type of upsell you might have. It might be increased usage, right? Buy more API calls or something, buy more users, something really, really simple. There's nothing, it'd be quite sensible to have somebody in there who might even be a junior, a BDR, taking their step into sales and learning the internal commercial processes. It sits in my team and goes, right, we've got all these upsells here, we've got usage going over at this point or whatever, predicting for that. Let's get you in touch and get you as part of the commercial person within my team that does this. But very simple stuff. And it keeps the CSM separate from it so that they can always position themselves going, I'm here about driving this value realization thing, nothing else. If there's someone commercial, somebody else comes in and you deal with them. because that I think helps drive that message and helps them get higher up in an account. You know, and you're right, I agree with everything else on if it's more complicated and you need a salesperson in there, that's only going to take the CSM off track as well. So that's what I think.
I wonder as well if it's like, it's a question of naming conventions, because in a lot of organizations that I've worked, they'll have solutions consultants who are there to support on the very technical aspects and sit almost in between the commercial functions and the customer success functions. But that could quite easily be a salesperson, that could quite easily be within customer success as well. So I guess what we keep coming back to is it really depends on the organization and what you're trying to achieve.
It does. And you've got sometimes when SCs will help you. And there'll be some times where they're like, I'm sorry, I'm new business only. And you're going to have to find somebody out the services team who can demo this for you. It's these kind of things. So you have to be very fluid and open to putting in models that work for now and then scale. And that's the thing. When it's not big enough to scale, that's when you've got to come in and be a bit creative about how you do these things.
Yeah, and equally, there are times when solutions consultants aren't commercial people, and you think, please don't say that. Don't say it some another way. Just don't ruin the deal.
All right,
It's
we
usually
have
services people, right?
Okay, we have one final question I think we can squeeze in before the top of the hour. So in 30 seconds or less, how would you, or I guess what the question is, what revenue focused initiatives can you implement in your CS strategy? So Chad, what would be your top initiative?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So one is, you may have heard of a customer success qualified lead strategy, where what you're trying to do there is create a process where the customer success managers are identifying possible opportunities and they're getting comped on those particular opportunities. So that's something you can build out. But if you're looking for something simple, something that I did at Customer, I think that worked really, really well, is we had a secondary product. You know, we were a CRM support platform and we had this chatbot solution. And so what we did is, instead of doing a webinar where you're educating customers about this chatbot, we called it a workshop, and we invited customers and we wanted them to actually activate their trial right on that particular call. And so it's just a great way of, you know, getting awareness, but getting people to use the products. They start their trial, and then you could pass those opportunities over to sales, and it's like a CSQL process there. So look for those gaps, look for those opportunities. They're there, and they're easier than you think.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks. Liv, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, very much echoing that. And again, to Kevin's point about account mapping, really understanding what the commercial reality is for your accounts and then prioritizing it accordingly.
Okay. Kevin?
Map, and map. So map your territory, right? Where we're going to be like hunting together or working together, right? Map your accounts and map, most importantly for me, map the value realization stages to upsell stages. If you got that, you got the structure in place, the rest is all cadence, right?
Great. Okay.
And add that as well, contact mapping too. I find in a lot of accounts we're often very single threaded on just the users, or one up, one down, etc. So yeah, making sure that you are as deep or as wide as you need to be to have commercial control.
Right. Yeah. Back to the good old account plan. No, I had to run processes literally across all of EMEA of how many accounts had account plans against them. Can I click on them and see them? No account plan, and you know, we can't do anything here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have time for this, but I'm going to pick your brains later, Kevin, about the best account plan format and accessibility at some point, because that is a burden that I don't think I've ever seen anyone achieve very well.
Yeah, let's swap details, and yeah, we'll be in touch. Yeah.
I think that sounds like another roundtable discussion right there. Okay, so we are very close to the top of the hour. If there are any questions that we haven't gotten to, we will address them in a follow-on post from the team here. So we will be also doing more roundtables in the future. So please follow us on LinkedIn if you would like to be alerted to future roundtable discussions and our follow-on post. of this conversation. So there was a lot of really fantastic takeaways. So as part of the follow-on post, we will outline some of the key takeaways so you can reference back to it all going forward. So any final thoughts or comments, Chad, Liv, Kevin?
It's been a good
so much
discussion.
fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right. Well, thank you for
Absolutely.
joining us. So, Go-to-Market Advisors, the entire team thanks you all because we know you're all very busy that you joined us for, well, what is now close to an hour conversation. It was a very robust conversation. So again, really appreciate everyone sharing their insights and expertise. And if anybody has any questions for me directly, please feel free to email me at elizabeth@gtmadvisors.com. I'm happy to take any questions. And again, follow us on LinkedIn. And everybody's LinkedIn profile are on our posts as well. So follow Chad, Liv, and Kevin for insights and their expertise going forward as well. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Bye now.
Bye.